Commander Elias Ward sat inside the alien vessel with his wrists bound by a strange silver restraint. The material was smooth, almost weightless, but no matter how he twisted his arms, it refused to break. His capture had been sudden. One moment he was piloting his ship through an asteroid field, the next a massive Xenari war cruiser had caught him in a gravity net. The fight had lasted only minutes, yet in those minutes he had shown them that humans did not fall easily. The corridor ahead opened into a grand chamber, and two tall guards pushed Elias forward. Their armor was black and violet, glowing faintly as if powered by the very stars. The chamber itself was vast, lined with banners and flowing light patterns on the walls. Every step echoed across the polished floor. At the far end sat Princess Kaelira, heir to the Xenari Empire, a figure both regal and intimidating. Her silver crown curved upward like the horns of some forgotten creature, and her violet eyes studied him with cold amusement. The crew stood in silence around her throne. They had expected to see a frightened human, perhaps begging or trembling. Instead, Elias walked forward with his head high, his back straight, and his eyes steady. Even in chains, he carried himself like a soldier who refused to break. Kaelira lifted her chin, her voice smooth yet sharp as crystal. "So this is the human who thought he could challenge my fleet. How curious. He looks so small, yet he caused my cruisers trouble." The crew laughed at her words, their voices echoing through the chamber. One of them muttered about weak species and another sneered at the thought of humans thinking themselves warriors. Kaelira let them laugh for a moment, then raised her hand. The room fell silent. She leaned forward, her lips curved in a faint smile. "From this day, you are mine," she said. "You will serve at my command. And before my crew, I will call you what you truly are. My pet." The word rang through the chamber. Laughter exploded from the crew again, louder this time. The guards looked down on Elias as if he were already defeated, expecting him to bow or rage in humiliation. But Elias did not lower his gaze. He stood still, then slowly allowed a small smile to touch his face. He bowed his head slightly, not in submission, but with a sharp grace that felt deliberate. His voice carried clear across the chamber. "Only yours." The laughter died. Silence filled the hall. For the first time, Princess Kaelira's confident mask cracked. Her eyes widened for a brief moment, then narrowed again, but not fast enough to hide the faint glow that spread across her cheeks. It was not the glow of anger, but something far more unexpected. She turned her head slightly, as if to hide her expression, but the crew had already noticed. Whispers moved like a wave through the hall. The human had not broken. He had answered her insult with something bold, something she had not prepared for. Instead of shame, he had given her words that carried weight, words that challenged her without open defiance. Elias held her gaze calmly. He was not smiling now. He simply looked at her as if to say that he had chosen his own dignity and no alien crown could take it from him. The crew waited for Kaelira's response, their laughter gone, replaced by unease. A few of them shifted uncomfortably, as if unsure whether their princess had won this exchange or lost it. Kaelira straightened her posture, her regal presence returning, though her voice carried a sharper edge. "You are bold, human. Perhaps too bold. But boldness can be tamed." Elias said nothing more. His silence was its own reply. He had spoken once, and that was enough. He knew the effect his words had left. As the guards pulled him back, Kaelira's violet eyes followed him, the glow on her cheeks fading slowly. She told herself it was nothing, a momentary slip, yet the memory of his answer echoed in her mind. Only yours. A phrase meant as defiance, yet it lingered as something else entirely. The chamber doors closed behind him, and the crew murmured among themselves. What was meant to be a display of power had turned into a question that none dared voice aloud. Had the human just unsettled their princess with nothing more than words? And deep within her heart, Princess Kalyra knew the answer. Elias Ward was no longer kept inside a dark cell. Instead, he was given a small chamber near the royal wing of the Zenari cruiser. The room was simple but clean, with a wide window showing the endless stars. The guards watched him closely, yet none dared to mock him anymore. His words in the throne chamber had already become whispers across the ship. Some said the human was arrogant. Others said he was clever. A few even said he had unsettled the princess herself. Princess Kalyra visited him often, though she never admitted that she came out of curiosity. At first, she told herself she wanted to study him, to learn how a human could resist humiliation so easily. Yet every time she stepped into his chamber, she found herself staying longer than planned. One evening, she entered in her royal armor, the glow of her crown reflecting against the window. She carried herself with calm pride, but her eyes searched his face for even the smallest reaction. Elias was seated near the window, his arms free of restraints, his posture relaxed yet alert. When he turned toward her, his expression was steady, as though he had been expecting her. "You walk freely here," Kalyra said, her voice measured. "Do you not fear that I may change my mind and chain you again?" Elias answered without hesitation. "If you wished to chain me, you would not need to warn me first. I think you came for another reason." The princess tilted her head slightly. "You presume much for one who stands in enemy territory. And you grant me much freedom for one who calls me her pet," Elias replied. His words carried no anger, only quiet strength. For a moment, Kalyra's lips curved upward before she caught herself. She leaned closer, her violet eyes narrowing as if she were studying him like a puzzle. "Tell me, human. Do you not feel shame when a princess of the empire lowers you with a single word?" Elias shook his head. "Words do not lower a person unless they believe them. You may call me what you like. But I will always know what I am." Her expression shifted, caught between amusement and frustration. "And what are you? A man who chooses his own worth," Elias answered. The reply silenced her for a moment. None of her generals, advisors, or soldiers had ever spoken to her so directly. They obeyed. They flattered. They feared. Yet this human stood unshaken, neither worshipping nor cowering. Kalyra changed the subject, trying to regain control of the exchange. "Your species is small. Your worlds are fragile. Do you truly believe humans can survive against an empire that spans the stars?" Elias turned back to the window, his eyes on the glowing stars. "Fragile things do not always break. Sometimes they endure longer than stone. Humanity has lived through storms, wars, hunger, and fire. Empires rise and fall, but people endure." The princess felt a strange pull in his words. They were simple, but there was weight behind them. Her people valued strength of arms, yet this human spoke of strength in endurance. It was not the kind of strength she had been taught to respect, but she could not dismiss it either. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You are bold when you speak to me. But boldness can be dangerous. Do you not fear what might happen if you test me too far?" Elias finally looked back at her. His gaze was steady, his tone calm. "Fear is natural. But if fear decides every choice, then a person is already defeated. The words struck her more deeply than she cared to admit. She turned away, pretending to study the patterns of light on the walls. In truth, she wanted to hide the faint glow that threatened to rise on her cheeks again. For the rest of the evening, their conversation continued. They spoke not only of power and fear but also of curiosity. Elias asked questions about the Zenari stars, their culture, their ships. Instead of mocking his ignorance, Kalyra found herself answering. She told him stories of distant nebulae, of cities carved into moons, of battles that shaped the empire. And though she spoke as a princess, her words carried a softer tone than before. When she finally rose to leave, she paused at the doorway. Her eyes lingered on him, and her voice dropped just slightly. Do not mistake my visits for weakness, human. You are still mine. Elias gave a faint smile. If that is so, then I am yours to prove wrong. The door closed, leaving Kalyra in silence. As she walked down the corridor, she tried to push his words from her mind, yet they stayed with her. She had meant to test him, to remind him of his place. Instead, she felt as though she had been the one tested. The game had begun, though neither of them fully understood its rules. The Zenari Empire lived by strength. Weakness was despised, mercy was seen as foolishness, and compassion was a word used only in mockery. For generations, the empire had conquered world after world with fire and steel. To them, humans were only another small species, fragile and unimportant. Yet aboard Princess Kalyra's cruiser, one human was beginning to disturb that belief. Elias Ward was watched constantly, but he never appeared broken. He did not beg for freedom. He did not rage against his captors. Instead, he observed, listened, and when given the chance, he spoke with calm confidence. That alone unsettled many of the crew. The first true test came during a mission to a colony world on the edges of Zenari territory. The colony had rebelled against imperial taxes, and Kalyra's ship was ordered to crush the resistance. The fleet descended upon the planet with weapons ready. The battle was brief, the colony forces quickly overpowered by Zenari technology. Yet when the dust settled, Elias saw something that none of the crew seemed to notice. Among the wreckage lay wounded Zenari soldiers, men and women who had fought fiercely for their empire. Their armor was shattered, their breathing weak. The medics were slow to arrive, for the empire did not always value the lives of soldiers once they were broken. Without waiting for permission, Elias ran forward. He lifted one of the injured, carrying him to safety despite the weight of the alien's armor. He tore strips of cloth from his own uniform to stop bleeding. He called for water, for bandages, for anything that might help. The guards shouted at him to step back, but Kalyra, who had been watching from her command post, raised her hand to silence them. She wanted to see what the human would do. Elias moved from one soldier to the next, his hands steady though his face was lined with urgency. He worked without complaint, even when a soldier he saved had laughed at him only days before. His actions carried no hatred, no desire for reward. He simply refused to let them die. The crew stared in confusion. Some whispered that he was acting foolish. Others asked why he would waste his strength on enemies who had mocked him. Yet a few, though they did not say it aloud, felt something stir in their hearts. When the medics finally arrived, Elias stepped back, his hands stained with alien blood. He stood straight once more, his breathing heavy but his eyes clear. Kalyra descended from her command post and approached him, her gaze fixed upon his face. "You saved them," she said, her voice low. "They were alive," Elias answered. That was enough. Her eyes narrowed. They would not have done the same for you. Elias gave a faint shrug. Perhaps not. But what they would do does not decide who I am. The words struck Kalira harder than she expected. She wanted to dismiss them, to remind him that mercy was weakness. Yet as she looked at her soldiers, alive because of his actions, she could not deny the truth of what he had done. Weakness had saved lives. Weakness had shown strength. Later, when they returned to the cruiser, the whispers grew louder. The crew spoke of the human who risked himself for their kind. Some laughed at the absurdity. Others called it madness. But more than a few could not forget the image of him carrying wounded soldiers with the resolve of a warrior. That night, Kalira visited his chamber again. She did not wear her crown or her armor. She stood by the window while he sat nearby, his hands still rough from the day's work. "You confuse my people," she said finally. "They do not understand you. Even I do not understand you." Elias looked at her calmly. "Then ask what you wish to know." She turned to him, her violet eyes filled with something between curiosity and unease. "Why save them? Why help those who scorn you? Why carry weight that is not yours to bear?" He met her gaze without fear. "Because life is worth saving. Because one act of kindness can mean more than 100 acts of cruelty. And because if I lose that, then I lose what makes me human." Kalira did not speak for a long time. She wanted to argue, to call his words naive, yet she could not. She remembered the faces of her soldiers, alive because of him. She remembered the strength in his eyes, a strength that came not from dominance but from compassion. At last, she said softly, "Perhaps your kind is not as small as we believed." Elias smiled faintly. "Perhaps your kind is not as unchangeable as you believe." She left the chamber soon after, but his words stayed with her. For the first time in her life, Princess Kalira felt a crack in the empire's perfect wall. And it had been made not by fire or steel, but by a human's choice to save those who mocked him. The stars outside the cruiser were calm, yet inside the halls of the ship tension hung heavy. The whispers about the human had not faded. Some crew members admired Elias for his bravery on the colony world. Others despised him for exposing them to a form of honor they did not understand. Princess Kalira herself felt unsettled. She had grown up in a world where power was measured only by victory. Now she had seen a human risk himself for soldiers who would have left him to die. Days passed in uneasy silence until the threat came without warning. The cruiser had been traveling near the edge of a nebula, a region often used by raiders to ambush imperial ships. At first, Kalira believed her vessel safe. Her fleet was strong, her defenses sharp. Yet even the strongest walls can fall when struck at the right place. A sudden blast shook the ship. Red alarms filled the corridors as enemy vessels emerged from the nebula. They were assassins hired by rivals in the Empire, sent not to destroy the fleet but to strike at Kalira herself. Explosions rocked the decks as enemy boarding parties forced their way inside. Soldiers rushed to meet them, but the attackers moved with precision. Their goal was not conquest. Their goal was the life of the princess. Elias was in his chamber when the attack began. The sound of battle reached him first, the clash of metal, the cries of soldiers, the thunder of explosions. A guard rushed in, ordering him to stay put, but Elias shook his head. He had no weapon, yet he would not sit while others fought to protect their lives. He pushed past the guard and ran into the smoke-filled corridor. He found Kalira surrounded by enemies near the command deck. Her guards were scattered, overwhelmed by the speed of the ambush. An assassin raised his blade, ready to strike her down. Without hesitation, Elias charged forward. He grabbed a fallen weapon from the floor and blocked the strike, his arms straining under the alien steel. Kaelira's eyes widened. She had not expected him to fight for her. Yet Elias stood firm, forcing the attacker back. Another enemy lunged at him, and Elias turned, swinging wildly but with determination. He was not trained in their weapons, but his will carried him through. He took a deep cut across his arm, but he did not fall. He pressed forward, shielding Kaelira with his body. More guards arrived, finally pushing the assassins back. The attackers retreated, vanishing into the smoke as quickly as they had appeared. The battle was over, but the damage was clear. Bodies lay across the deck, sparks fell from the walls, and Elias stood bleeding, his breathing heavy. Kaelira rushed to him, her hands trembling though she tried to hide it. "You are hurt," she said. He shook his head. "Not enough to matter." "Are you safe?" The words struck her harder than any blade. He bled from wounds meant for her, yet he asked only if she was safe. Her heart pounded with a feeling she had never known. She was princess of the empire, heir to a throne of power, yet in that moment she felt something greater than crowns or armies. She felt the bond of trust. "Foolish human," she whispered, though her voice was softer than before. "You should not risk your life for me." Elias smiled faintly through the pain. "You would have done the same." She wanted to argue, to deny it, but she could not. She looked at him and saw not a prisoner, not a pet, but a man who chose to stand between her and death. The crew who watched from the edges of the deck saw it too. They had witnessed the human's courage with their own eyes. No words could erase what they had seen. When the medics arrived, Elias refused treatment until Kaelira was checked first. He stood there bleeding, insisting she be cared for before him. Her chest tightened at the sight. Never before had anyone placed her safety above their own in such a simple, unshakable way. Later, when he was finally treated, she sat beside him in the infirmary. She tried to speak as a princess, to remind him of his place, yet her words faltered. All she could say was, "Why?" Elias looked at her calmly, his arm wrapped in bandages. "Because it was the right thing to do." Kaelira turned her face away, hiding the faint glow rising on her cheeks. She told herself it was the light of the medical lamps, but she knew the truth. A bond had been forged that no chain of the empire could break. And deep inside, she feared it was only the beginning. The infirmary of the Zenari cruiser was silent except for the soft hum of machines. Elias sat on the bed, his arm wrapped in white bandages. His wounds still ached, but he carried himself with the same calm strength he had shown since the day of his capture. Across from him, Princess Kaelira stood near the window, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. She had dismissed the medics, wanting privacy for a conversation she could no longer avoid. For days, she had turned his actions over in her mind. He had shielded her without hesitation, fought enemies with no weapon but courage, and placed her safety above his own. She could not explain it. Among her people, no one acted without gain. Loyalty was given for power, kindness was traded for reward. Yet Elias had risked himself without promise of either. "You confuse me," she said at last, her voice steady though her heart was not. "You fight as if you are one of us, but you are not. You save lives when you gain nothing by it. Why do you do this?" Elias looked at her quietly, then spoke. "Because I am human. That is reason enough." Her eyes narrowed. "That is no answer. What does it mean to be human?" He leaned back against the bed, his gaze drifting to the stars beyond the window. "It means we are fragile, yet we endure. It means we fall, yet we rise again. We are not the strongest, not the fastest, not the most advanced. But we keep moving forward. We laugh even when the world is cruel. We hold to hope even when everything seems lost. That is what it means to be human. Kalyra felt her chest tighten. His words were simple, but they carried weight. She had heard speeches from generals, lessons from philosophers, and commands from emperors, but none had touched her the way his words did. His strength did not come from fear or power. It came from the spirit of his people. Hope, she repeated, as if testing the word. In the empire, hope is considered weakness. It blinds soldiers, it softens rulers. Or it gives them reason to fight, Elias replied. Without hope, strength means nothing. Without hope, victory is empty. Hope is not weakness. It is the reason we keep going. She turned away, unsettled by the feeling growing inside her. If your people are so strong in spirit, why do you lose battles? Why does your kind fall to empires like mine? Elias gave a small smile. Because we are only human. We bleed, we break, and sometimes we lose. But we also learn, and we never stop trying. That is our strength. Not perfection. Persistence. The room was quiet. Kalyra felt her thoughts twist in directions she had never allowed before. She had been taught that empires lasted forever, that power was eternal, yet here stood a man who claimed greatness not through power but through survival. And something inside her wanted to believe him. Later that day, Kalyra gathered her council in the command chamber. Advisors, generals, and captains stood in a circle, their faces sharp with suspicion. They had grown uneasy with the human's presence. His actions had impressed some of the crew, and whispers of respect had begun to spread. To them, this was dangerous. One general stepped forward. Princess, the human has become a threat. His influence spreads among the soldiers. They question why he is given freedom. They question why he walks beside you. He must be broken before he breaks us. Kalyra's eyes hardened, though her heart wavered. Broken how publicly, the general said. Strip him of pride. Make him bow. Show the crew that he is nothing more than a captive. Murmurs of agreement filled the chamber. Kalyra listened, her face unreadable. Yet inside, she felt conflict tear at her. She remembered Elias lifting wounded soldiers, standing against assassins, and speaking of hope with a voice that refused to break. Could she reduce him to nothing after all he had done that night? She returned to his chamber once more. He was awake, sitting by the window as always, watching the endless sea of stars. She hesitated, then spoke softly. My council wishes me to destroy you. Not with weapons, but with words. They want me to strip away your pride in front of the crew. Elias turned toward her, his expression calm. And will you? Her throat tightened. She wanted to say yes, to prove her loyalty to the empire. Yet when she looked at him, the words would not come. Instead, she asked, almost in a whisper, how do you stay unbroken when everything is against you? He met her gaze. Because I know who I am. I am only human. That may not sound like much to you, but to me, it is everything. Kalyra's breath caught. She had called him a pet to humiliate him, yet he had turned those words into something else. Now he took the phrase only human, a phrase meant to sound small, and carried it as if it were a crown. She left him in silence that night, but his words followed her. For the first time, Princess Kalyra questioned whether the empire she had been born to rule was as strong as it claimed to be. and she wondered if one human could change more than just her heart. The grand chamber of the Zenari cruiser was filled with silence as the council gathered once more. Generals, captains, and advisors stood around the throne, their faces stern. Princess Kaelyra sat tall, her silver crown glinting under the glow of the chamber lights. Yet inside her chest, her heart was not steady. The council had demanded proof of her loyalty. They wanted her to break Elias in front of all, to remind the crew that a human was nothing compared to the Empire. When Elias entered the chamber under guard, all eyes turned to him. He walked with calm steps, his shoulders straight, his gaze steady. Though he wore no crown, no armor, he carried himself with a dignity that unsettled many of the Zenari present. The crew gathered in the hall expected a spectacle, a show of dominance by their princess. Kaelyra rose slowly from her throne. Her violet eyes met Elias's, and for a moment the chamber seemed to fall away. She remembered the colony, where he had saved her soldiers. She remembered the attack, where he had shielded her with his own body. She remembered his words in the quiet of his chamber, about hope, about persistence, about what it meant to be human. And now, she was expected to reduce him to nothing with a single word. The general who had pressed her earlier stepped forward. "Princess, it is time. Show them what becomes of those who stand too tall. Call him what he truly is." Kaelyra's hands tightened at her sides. She forced her voice steady as she looked at Elias. "You stand here as my prisoner, taken from a failed ship, from a small and fragile world. Before all present, I name you my pet." Gasps rose from the hall. Some smiled with cruel satisfaction. Others waited for the human to break. The word echoed, sharp and heavy. Yet Elias did not flinch. He bowed his head slightly, not as one who submitted, but as one who chose to answer on his own terms. His voice was calm, strong, carrying across the hall. "Only yours." The chamber fell silent. It was the same answer he had given the day of his capture, but this time it held more. It was not mockery. It was not weakness. It was a choice. His tone carried weight, a bond, a quiet defiance that no laughter could erase. Kaelyra felt her chest tighten, and before she could stop herself, her face flushed with the faint glow of her people's blush. The crew saw it. Whispers spread quickly. The princess had faltered. The general snarled. "He dares to mock you again. Strike him down. End this game." Kaelyra turned sharply, her voice cutting through the hall like steel. Silence. The general froze. The crew held their breath. The princess stepped down from her throne and walked toward Elias. Her footsteps echoed in the chamber. She stopped before him, close enough that only he could hear her quiet words. "You leave me no choice," she whispered. "If I follow the Empire, I must crush you. If I follow my heart, I must defy them all." Elias met her gaze. "Then choose what you believe is right." She stood still for a long moment. Then she turned back to her council, her voice rising with a strength that filled the chamber. "This human is no one's pet. He is my equal. His courage shames those who mock him. His honor surpasses many who call themselves warriors. If you cannot see that, then it is not he who is weak. It is you." The chamber erupted with shouts. Some cried out in outrage, others in disbelief. The general stepped forward in fury. "You betray the Empire for a human." Kaelyra's eyes burned with resolve. "No, I show the Empire that strength is more than cruelty, that loyalty is more than fear. If the Empire cannot understand this truth, then perhaps the empire is not worthy of ruling the stars. Her words struck the hall like thunder. Never before had a royal heir spoken against the doctrine of the empire. The crew stood divided, torn between loyalty to tradition and the new fire their princess had unleashed. Elias remained silent, but his eyes never left hers. In his gaze, Kalyra found no triumph, only quiet support. She had taken a step that could not be undone, and she had taken it not for weakness but for truth. As the chamber slowly calmed, the council realized what had happened. Princess Kalyra had not just spared a human. She had defied the heart of the empire itself. And though rebellion had not yet begun, its spark had been lit in that hall, carried on the bond between a princess and a man who refused to break. The days that followed were heavy with tension. Princess Kalyra's declaration in the grand chamber spread across the ship like fire. Some crew members whispered her words with awe, while others spoke them with anger. To call a human an equal was unheard of. To defy the council in front of her fleet was almost treason. Yet none could deny what they had seen. The princess had chosen to stand beside Elias Ward, and the human had stood unbroken before them all. Elias was still a prisoner in name, yet the walls around him felt different now. Guards no longer mocked him. Some even nodded with quiet respect when he passed. Others avoided his eyes, unwilling to admit the unease growing in their hearts. The empire had always told them that humans were lesser, but this one human had shown them courage that many of their own lacked. Kalyra met with her council again, though the chamber was colder than before. The general who had demanded Elias's humiliation glared at her, his voice sharp with fury. "You have shamed the empire. You have weakened the throne." The crew whispers of hope, and hope is poison. "You risk rebellion." Kalyra did not waver. "Perhaps rebellion is what the empire deserves. If our rule is so fragile that one human's dignity can shake it, then maybe it is not strength we hold but fear." The council erupted in argument, yet Kalyra stood firm. She had crossed a line that could not be erased. The choice had been made, and she would not take it back. That night, she visited Elias in his chamber once more. He was seated by the window as always, watching the stars. She stood beside him, her expression softer than it had ever been. "You have changed everything," she said quietly. He looked at her with calm eyes. "I did not change your empire. I only spoke what I believe. You chose what to do with those words." She studied him, her voice almost a whisper. "Do you know what they call you now? What do they call me?" She hesitated before answering. The word pet still lingers, but it no longer sounds like insult. Some speak it with unease. Some with wonder. "You have taken a word meant to chain you and turned it into something else. That is your legacy already." Elias gave a small smile. "Words only have power if we let them. You gave the word meaning when you spoke it. I gave it meaning when I answered. Together, we changed it." For a long time, neither spoke. The stars stretched endlessly before them, and the silence carried more than words could hold. In the weeks that followed, the empire began to stir. Rumors spread beyond Kalyra's cruiser, carried by soldiers who had witnessed the moment in the chamber. Some dismissed the stories as lies. Others felt their hearts moved by them. A princess who stood beside a human. A human who claimed equality with courage and truth. Rebellions began to spark in quiet corners of the empire. Not all were loud, not all were bloody, but they carried the same question: was strength truly measured by domination, or could it be measured by compassion and hope? The question was dangerous, yet it spread faster than any fleet could contain. Elias remained by Kalyra's side, not as her captive but as something more complex. He was not her soldier, not her subject, yet not fully free either. He was a partner, bound by choice rather than chains. When she walked through the halls, some still bowed in fear, but others looked at her with something new in their eyes. Respect, not only for her crown, but for the courage she had shown. One evening, as they stood together on the observation deck, Kalyra spoke again. When I first called you pet, I thought I was placing you beneath me. I thought I was showing strength. But you answered in a way I could not control. You turned my words against me, and in doing so, you changed me. Elias's voice was quiet but steady. I did not change you. I only reminded you of what was already inside you. She looked at him, her cheeks glowing faintly once more. For a moment, she was not a princess of the empire, not the heir to a throne. She was simply Kalyra, a woman standing beside a man who had refused to bow. The galaxy was vast, the empire powerful, and the road ahead uncertain. Yet both of them knew that something had begun that could not be undone. A single word, once meant as insult, had become the seed of a legacy. And across the stars, whispers grew. They spoke not only of conquest and power, but of a human who answered without fear, and a princess who blushed at his reply. Only yours. A phrase once spoken in defiance had become the beginning of a story that would shape empires, not by chains, but by choice.